Hello and welcome to the OTB channel. Well, 3 days ago, Linux Mint released its new version 20, in 3 different desktop environments: Cinnamon, Marte and XFCE. Today, I'm going to look at the different desktop environments, how they differ, and look at which might be suitable for different users. See you after the intro. Hello and welcome back. You can see the pork pie hats having an outing today, just for a change. So we're looking at Linux Mint. And I know there's lots of reviewers out there have looked at Mint over the last few days, and I'm not surprised because by any standards, it's one of the most popular distros out there. I did a video, it's over 6 months ago now, and I asked the question, is it the beginner's distro? And I got lots of comments back from that saying it's not just for beginners. And I didn't really mean to infer that it was a beginner's distro only. What I meant to say was it's a really great distro and beginners will find it straightforward in particular. But that doesn't mean that more advanced users and old lags like me couldn't also use it to its full potential. And I think that's always been the case with Linux Mint. It's one of the most popular distributions for a reason. And the reason is it's well put together, it looks great, and from installation through to actually using the system and all of its tools, it's pretty seamless, especially for new users and especially for people coming over from Windows. They will generally find the environment very comfortable, especially the flagship Cinnamon environment. But many experienced users continue to use it. I know in my Facebook group, it's a big favorite, and so it would have been rude not to look at this latest release. Now, I know there's been all sorts of debates going on recently about Linux Mint dropping snaps, and I don't really want to get into that. Bottom line, though, is snaps was just an option that's available in the likes of Ubuntu. You can remove it in Ubuntu if you want. Linux Mint have gone a step further and actually prohibited just a straightforward reinstall of snapd through apt, but I'm sure there's workarounds if you desperately want snapd installed. I don't see that as that important, to be honest. You've still got the option of your traditional debs and flatpaks and app images and whatever you want to use. I'm going to focus more on, during this review, on the 3 flavors of Linux Mint, which are Cinnamon, Marte and XFCE. And the reason I'm going to do this is I've had a few questions recently from various people asking me, so what is a desktop environment? You know, because I'm trying to wrap my head around it. And I think it's something that we take for granted when we've been using Linux for a while. New users to Linux in particular are suddenly going to be thrown hundreds of distros that they can choose from, and they've got to pick which one. And then amongst the distros that they choose, they've then often asked to pick a desktop environment as well. Well, just to kind of straighten that matter out, Linux is essentially Linux. It's a kernel, and it comes bundled with a set of tools, normally the GNU tool set, which is why people often insist on calling it GNU Linux. I just use the word Linux for simplicity. On the top of that system, which you can use by the command line just as you did with the old DOS system, you can often have window managers and desktop environments bolted on. Now, a window manager is just what it says. It's a program that manages the windows, the program windows on your operating system, like the old Windows 3.1 used to work when it was put on top of DOS. A desktop environment goes a stage further. It uses a window manager, but it also bundles in all sorts of tools and themes and icons and a look and feel to the system. So you can pick different desktop environments just because you like the look, or because you like the tools that they come bundled with, or because you like the fact that they're lightweight and not heavy. And to be honest, it's all about personal preference. There isn't a best desktop environment or a least good desktop environment. It really is about picking and choosing. So I thought what I would do this time is I would look at the 3 flavors of Mint and focus strongly on differences between the 3 flavors more than just installing Linux Mint, although I will do a single install very quickly. It's the same for all versions. And we'll just run through and see what the difference is. I'm sure that what you'll notice while I'm doing this is that because Mint is so strong on branding, at first glance, it's not that easy to tell the difference. The main difference, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that they all use a different amount of resources. Cinnamon, which is the flagship for the Linux Mint developers, and which they started to develop at the point when GNOME 2 moved over to GNOME 3, and they didn't want to go with the GNOME 3 shell, or the GNOME 3 shell in the format of GNOME 3, and they developed a different desktop environment. So Cinnamon is very much Linux Mint's own desktop environment. It's available for many other distributions these days, but Cinnamon is something that is synonymous with Linux Mint. So you would expect it to be at its best on the distro. Marte was another breakaway from the GNOME shell days, which was very much initially an attempt to maintain the traditional look and feel of the GNOME 2 desktop. It's been actively developed from, 2011, 2012, something like that. It's my personal favourite. It's a desktop that's equally functional to Cinnamon, but perhaps has less of the bling, but it's lighter weight, and that goes with that. And then we have XFCE, which has been around a long time before Mint or, Marte or Cinnamon. And its release cycles aren't quite as fast. It's a very traditional desktop, but like all of these desktop environments, it can be customized to look how you want. And Linux Mint have clearly done that. The big bonus and the big thing in favor of the XFCE desktop is the fact that it's the lightest desktop environment of the 3. So if you have older software, that's the one to choose. Whichever one you do choose, though, and I would give all 3 a spin, just in a live environment to see which one you prefer, you can install other desktop environments, on top of the one that you've got. It doesn't just have to have a single one. You can even install other window managers. So with all that said, I'm looking at 3 different flavors. I'm doing 3 installations. I'll just show you one, and we'll go through this as quickly as possible, but it's going to take a little bit of time because I'm going to look at all 3. Right, so let's kick this party off. Right, so just to illustrate the installation process, I've got a copy of the Linux Mint Cinnamon edition on VirtualBox. That's what you can see right now. And I've activated the desklet. And really what I want to do is just show you how long it takes. It really is a next process with this Ubiquiti installer. You've all seen the process before, but there's very little to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed this up. Keep your eye on the desklet there in the top right, and we'll see how long it takes. It's just clicked over to 10:59, so let's start. Right, so that's the installation finished. It's showing 12:09 on the screen on the top right. Obviously, that's clicked on an hour because as I set my time zone, it moved from 10:59, 11 o'clock through to 12. So it took 10 minutes, but that included me putting in all of the settings and my locale and entering my password, etc., etc. On real hardware, it's likely to be faster, and there's not a lot to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to restart, we'll come back, and we'll look at the Linux Mint Cinnamon Desktop. So I've rebooted into the installed Linux Mint Cinnamon, and you're immediately greeted by this very smart looking logon screen. So let me just log in, and there we are. It's established a connection, and it's given me a warning about my video drivers, because I'm on VirtualBox. But if you wanted to launch your driver manager anyway on real hardware, you could do it straight away from there. So you're greeted by this welcome screen. But before we do that, before we start anything else, let me just have a quick look at the system monitor from just logging in to see what the RAM usage is. And RAM usage, according to this, it's just going up slightly now, 918 megs. I've given it 8 gig of RAM. So Cinnamon is probably the heaviest resource user of the three Linux Mint desktop environments. But under a gig, it's not too bad, and most modern computers will certainly be able to cope with it. So you start with this Welcome to Linux Mint screen, and you move on to your first steps. And it immediately gives you the option of choosing your desktop colors, whether you prefer a light or a dark desktop theme. Well, let's open up a file manager. We use something called Nemo by default, which is a really nice file manager, and I can switch it immediately over to a dark theme. And there we go. We now have a nice dark theme if that's what you prefer. Or if you prefer it to be light, that's great. Choose your favorite layout. How do you want the bottom panel or the bottom bar to look? Do you want it to be modern, or do you want to assume the traditional view? There we are. There's traditional. And we'll switch back now. Okay. You have the ability to take system snapshots. You can check the driver manager from this screen. You can run updates. You can open all of your system settings. You can open up the software manager to install other applications. And you do, of course, have a firewall there that you can launch. You'll need to put in your password that was created during the installation. And this is the uncomplicated firewall. And if you want to turn it on, you simply click the status bar. And you then have the ability to, if I can just move to rules, to set up rules. And you have an application category here for various games, SSH, etc., etc. And it'll just automatically configure everything for you. By default, I'm just going to close that now. It's set to deny any incoming connections and allow all outgoing connections. So, quite straightforward. A link to the documentation, to the new features in this particular release, and to the release notes. You also have links to the web forum and the IRC chat room. So right from the word go, you've got a couple of options. The Cinnamon Desktop, I always feel it's Linux Mint's flagship. It is probably one of the most Windows-like of all the desktop environments. If you are coming over from the likes of Windows 7, you are going to be immediately comfortable in the Cinnamon Desktop. We have a right-click menu, so if you wanted, for instance, to change your desktop background, you can do so from here. And by default, I see there's a couple of nice ones already selected, and you'll just click on them, and it will change. There you go. Or we can stay with the fairly plain ones. Completely up to yourself. Okay, we'll just leave it at that for the time being. You can also add desklets, so little widgets. They've got a few there. The clock desklet you saw while I was installing, a digital photo frame, and all sorts of other ones. Just refresh the cache, and then pick what you want. And there's plenty to choose from if you like your desktop bling. What about applications installed by default? Well, along the bottom panel, we have a link to your file manager, Nemo. We have a link to the terminal. As Windows users, you may not be used to that. And to be honest, it's not absolutely essential. You can do most things, if not everything, without ever getting into it. But if you start to use Linux quite often, it's one of those things that you will start to become familiar with. We have a link to the web browser, which is Firefox. Obviously, everything takes a little longer to launch the first time until it's got itself started from scratch. And we have a Show Desktop button, the same as you have in Windows. Then we have a very straightforward menu. You can search in this top search bar for applications, or you can run through the various categories. And it comes pretty much fully loaded, ready to go. You can, of course, add to it, but there's plenty here to get you started, such as a document viewer, Redshift to change the hue of your screen for day and night, screenshot tools, a USB image writer and formatter, and the new star of Linux Mint, something called Warpinator, which allows you to drag and drop files across your network. So no other computers found at the moment, because it's going to need other computers with Warpinator installed. And if other computers are running Warpinator, it should be as easy as just dragging and dropping files across between laptops and workstations. Graphics, pics to view and organize your images. You have a drawing utility. You have Firefox, HexChat, Thunderbird, and Transmission for your BitTorrents installed by default. You have the LibreOffice suite there. Celluloid for your movies and Rhythmbox for your music. And then we have all your administration and settings, and we'll look at them in a second. In terms of preferences, account details, applets, backgrounds, Bluetooth, date and time, you name it. Just about everything. Hot corners, notifications, screensaver settings, etc., etc. So, administration. And how could we possibly go, oh, well, let's look at the left to start off with. So you also have some shortcuts here. One for Firefox, one for your software manager. So if you want to install new software, you simply open up this. It's refreshing its cache. And we'll just give it a second. And there you go. You can search for pretty much anything you want. So we have some recommended ones here on the front page. Skype, Wine for your running Windows applications, the GIMP, Inkscape, etc., etc. and you can just look through the various categories that you wish to. So unlike Windows, you're not going to have to go off on all sorts of websites and find different applications here, there and everywhere. We then have a link to the general settings where we can look at that backgrounds page that we just looked at. I think actually there's some additional ones there as well. There is indeed. So you've got a good old selection of backgrounds to get you started. Windows effects, fonts, themes. Let's have a look at the themes. I quite like this theme changer within Cinnamon. It makes it really easy. You just click on the part of your desktop, I don't know what you'd call it, structure that you want to change, and it changes it. So if you want to change the color of your icons, you can change them there. If you want to change the buttons, you change them there. If you want to change your mouse pointer, the same sort of thing. And generally, if you want to change your desktop look and feel, you can do it from there. What else have we got? All the standard things, various applets that you can add, extensions, languages, notifications, online accounts if you want to configure them, and startup applications. Okay, so all good. So it's a nice, straightforward and easy desktop to work with. There's a reason for it being the main flagship for Linux Mint. It was Linux Mint who developed this desktop, as I said earlier, and that was partly in response to when Ubuntu shifted over from the standard GNOME 2 desktop to GNOME 3. So Linux Mint decided to go their own way. And whilst this is available in the repositories of many distributions these days, I often think that if you want to see a desktop environment as it should be, you go back to the source and you go back to the distro that it was developed for in the first place. So double click on the computer. All good. We can see what we've got, our file system. Printers down here in the little system tray. So let's have a launch of it. Interestingly enough, and this will be an absolute stunner for Windows users, I've installed this distro. I haven't even opened the printer utility. And will you have a look there? It has already discovered that I have a network printer. That's what it's found on my network so far. And it would be an easy process of simply saying add, click on network printer. There we go. It's found it. I click on that, hit forward. It's searching for any drivers that it needs to install for the printer. We'll just let it do that. It might take a few seconds. Okay, forward, apply, and let's print a test page. You can probably hear my printer now working, and it looks like it's printing out at this very point. And it really is that easy. All done. That's the printer configured. So let me shut that down now. What else does this Cinnamon desktop have? Well, Warpinator is the big thing that they are showcasing, but it also has much improved support for NVIDIA graphics, especially if you have an NVIDIA Optimus setup. It's running Cinnamon 4.6, and there's been a whole range of little improvements, including changing the DPI of icons, and they've clearly worked on this system tray as well, which looks pretty good to me. So that's a quick overview of Cinnamon. I personally think that for someone brand new to Linux, it's possibly one of the best choices that you can make. Right, so I've taken you through the Cinnamon desktop. We are now at the Marte desktop. And the one thing that you can say about Linux Mint flavors is, although they use different desktop environments, there is definitely one brand. And in many ways, they are very similar. The innovations that you saw in Cinnamon, such as Warpinator are here in the Marte Desktop as well. It's simply about look and feel more than anything else. So I've already taken you through the welcome screen. It's the same as you saw on Cinnamon, no difference. Let me have a look at the monitor and see how much RAM this system is using. Okay, so Marte is slightly lighter than Cinnamon. And as we go down from flavour to flavour, from Cinnamon to Marte to XFCE, you should probably see a decrease in RAM usage each time. The Marte Desktop very much follows the original GNOME 2 traditional look and feel of a Linux desktop, and it was created at the same time, more or less, as Cinnamon. Both were a reaction to the old GNOME 2 desktop being abandoned in favour of the new GNOME shell. Now, it wasn't developed by the Linux Mint developers like Cinnamon was, but they were actually one of the first adopters, and it's been an official flavour, I think, since 2012. So you see the Mint desktop, the Marte desktop in front of you, and the first thing that you see is, well, everything looks pretty much the same apart from the panel is slightly different. You can right-click, just as before, you can change your desktop background. And there you go. So it looks slightly different, but you still have a large selection of backgrounds there. The menu is also a little bit different. There's a slightly different look to it in the way that it's laid out on the left-hand side, but on the right you can see much the same as you saw before. So the full LibreOffice suite, celluloid, rhythm box, system tools, time shifts there, your admin, your preferences, and I presume it also has this Warpinator there. Yes, there it is. Warpinator is there as well. So really very, very clean. You'll find on other implementations of the Marte desktop, the default comes with 2 panels, and the top panel has a menu consisting of 3 components, and it looks pretty much like the old GNOME 2 desktop. But Mint have revamped this version, and yeah, it looks really modern. So you can open the control center there. Slightly different look. It also doesn't use the Nemo file manager. It uses a file manager that I can never pronounce. It's called Karja. There we go. Karja. But hey, it looks pretty much the same. I suppose, if anything, Cinnamon just looks a bit more blingy, a bit more polished, whereas the Marte desktop has that very much traditional GTK look and feel. And from a personal point of view, I prefer the look and feel of Marte. It's just as easy to work through. The settings or control panel, if you like, are exactly the same. And you can, of course, with Marte, configure the look and feel of the desktop. You have a few preset themes here already. Well, more than a few. There's an awful lot that are preset for you. So if you wanted, for instance, to have mint purple, there you go. You can have purple icons. Or you can go back to the standard green, or you can have mint blue, or you can just pick one and click the customize button. And then you can choose the various bits and pieces that you want. So the overall controls and buttons, the window borders, the icon sets that you want to use, they're all down here, and the pointers. So that's Marte. I have to say that I really think they have done a cracking job here. I tell you what, let's go and have a look at XFCE and see whether that's much different. Right, so that was the Marte Desktop. What you're looking at now, though, is the Linux Mint XFCE Desktop. Can you tell the difference yet? There really isn't a great deal, is there, at first look? The traditional vanilla XFCE Desktop is a very plain-looking environment, but you can customize it, of course, to look however you want. And Linux Mint has obviously taken the step here of strongly applying its brand to the extent that there's not a massive difference. You have the same welcome screen here with all the functionality that you've already seen. The firewall is obviously there, the software manager, the update manager, the driver manager, the option to take system snapshots. And if we go into the menu, which is actually a little bit more different than what we've seen, it's the XFCE Whisper menu. It still has that very traditional look and feel to it. Warpinator is there. So this is the new kind of drop files across different computers in the environment. And let's just search for HTOP and see what resources this is using. Okay, it's on a virtual machine. It's using 585 megs, so 580 megs, give or take. And that compares to the Marte Desktop, which was 200 megs, give or take, higher. And then the Cinnamon Desktop that was 200 megs higher than that. So I think the way that you can actually look at these different flavors is it depends how lightweight you want your desktop environment to be. And that's partly going to be whether you like a lightweight desktop, whether your hardware can support the likes of Cinnamon, or whether it's perhaps a little bit older and XFCE would fit it, I don't know, you know, more appropriately. Ultimately, though, the desktop environments all do the same thing. And I'm looking here, and we've got that same nice icon set over on the system tray there. So, yeah, you've got the same applications essentially throughout here. And let's have a look at the settings. Whoops, we can go to the settings from there. You will see if we click on appearance, it again looks different, but you've got all the options here. So if I open up the Thunar file manager, we can go for different looks and feels. Choose your poison. We've got different icon sets just as before. So if we wanted to pick a color, I don't know, yellow. Let's go for, oh my God. Right. Okay. Let's not go for yellow. Let's go for something different. How about the Ubuntu look and feel if you wanted to go that way, or even purple. So there's quite a few styles that you can apply here. Completely up to yourself. You can even go for the original Add Waiter theme, which I'm not a great fan of, but hey, up to you. Right, so the appearance you can pretty much do what you want with. Let's go back into the settings here. The standard desktop settings. Here you get to change your window manager and compositor if you want to, over from, well, to Compton or to XFWM4, which is the standard, or indeed to Metacity. So great, good to have those options. All the settings for your file manager, window manager tweaks. You'll notice that it's not quite as blingy as the other two, but that doesn't mean it hasn't got just as much functionality. Your power manager, your mouse and touchpad, your firewall. I mean, if I open this up, you can see as soon as it comes up, it's exactly the same firewall as we've already seen, UFW. And I know a lot of people actually prefer the XFCE Desktop, simply because it does everything that Marte can do. It does everything that Cinnamon can do. It perhaps on the surface doesn't look quite as blingy, but it's really lightweight. This feels really snappy as well, I have to say, but you would expect that because XFCE is such a lightweight desktop. I think we've done enough about Mint now. Let's go and have a chat. So that's the latest release from Linux Mint in 3 flavors, all of which look pretty similar, but there's obviously a difference in terms of their resource usage and little bits and pieces in terms of the look and feel. What you go for is completely up to you. My personal opinion is I really, really like Linux Mint. I think it's going from strength to strength. How does it stand as far as Ubuntu is concerned? Well, you know that I'm not a GNOME desktop user. I think the 3 desktop environments that Linux Mint has chosen are the ones that I would have chosen in Ubuntu. And if Ubuntu had had those as its standard desktop environments, I think it'd be on a stronger footing, but that's just my opinion. I think it's a well put together, very nice looking distro. It's nicely themed, Linux Mint. You can't go far wrong with it, people. If it is your first step into Linux, well, by all means, use it, give it a go. The installation is simplicity itself. It will even set up a dual boot for you should you need it to. And it's just a next process. So a great experience. I find it quite hard to criticize because it is one of the greats. No, I don't use it at the moment. I have used it in the past. I use an Arch system, but an Arch system is not really for beginners, and I use that for very specific reasons. So we'll call it a day here, guys. Please don't forget to join me on Library or my Facebook group. And some news. I followed Luke Smith the other day when he was telling us all to install our own web server. And I did. And after installing it, I've managed to put together a fairly basic site. And not overly sure how I'm going to use it fully yet, but a few people have asked me to do some merch. So I registered for a Spreadshirt store the other day, and there's links to it on the website. You'll see it over here when that comes up. And I'm not doing Patreon at the moment, as you know, but if you'd like to buy me a pint because you've enjoyed the video or you found it useful, there's a PayPal button on there as well. Guys, have a great week. See you next time.